As writers, we know just how hard it is to distill our stories into something small. I mean, that's why we write long novels that are thousands and thousands of words, because it's so stinking hard to actually condense our stories down to little blurbs. But that is what we're going to be talking about today. How to write compelling book blurbs and concepts. Things that are between 200, 350 words, where it's just a small blurb that has everything in it that your reader needs to know before they start reading. So make sure to hit the subscribe button and follow along for more writing tips, and let's dive into the video. So what exactly is a concept? It's a small blurb that contains all of the needed information in your story to hook a reader, hook an editor or an agent, and get them excited about your story. Through the process of the author conservatory, I developed these really early on in my story, so they're basically the first thing I write before I write any synopsises or outlines. I write the concept. So it's just 200 words of what I foresee the story to be. And then from there, I pitch that concept and that story idea to one of our instructors, and then we go from there. But it is such an important skill to learn because they are not easy to write, and I feel like they're way easier to write at the beginning of the story than at the end, because at the end you have everything, you have all the details, and it's way harder to get and sit down to what's actually important in your story. Whereas at the beginning, you don't know everything. So I like writing them right at the beginning, and then as I go, as I've written outlines, as I've drafted, then I start tweaking them and adding things, because obviously your story will change as you go, but it's great to start with these and then see how your story is going to develop from there. So there are 5 elements to a strong concept. The first one is sympathetic characters. So you absolutely have to build up who your character is and why a reader should like them. I'm doing another video on sympathetic characters, so make sure that you follow along and stick around to watch that whole video of what I discuss is a sympathetic character and how to make your characters more sympathetic. But that is a huge thing that you have to include in your concept, because if you don't have a character people love, they're not going to read the book. Number 2 is high stakes. High stakes are so important in any story. Nobody really wants to read a book where the main characters just sit on the couch and eat potato chips. I don't know. You need stakes in your story to make them come alive and build the tension. People love to read books with tension, so it's so important to create stakes. And sometimes that means stakes of, oh, the world is going to end if the scientist doesn't find the solution. Or sometimes it's smaller things like, okay, this is not a smaller thing, but like my mom would die if blank doesn't happen. Or a smaller stake, if blank doesn't happen, then she'll lose the guy she loves. Maybe that doesn't mean that he actually dies, but it could be that they fall apart, that they aren't as close, that the relationship ends. So there are tons of different types of stakes in the world, but it's so important that you're finding the high stakes to move the tension in your story, because readers want tension. And it's not always big things. It doesn't have to be life or death, but it's so important to include those in your story. And the basis of high stakes is sympathetic characters at risk of loss. So what are your character at risk of loss? What do they not want to lose? And then usually as writers, we just make them lose whatever they don't want to lose. And then that creates a good story. And number 3 is believability. Do the characters and the world and the plot all make sense? Do they feel believable? Are they actually accurate? If you're writing historical fiction, does it actually make sense in the world that's happening? If you're crafting your own world, you're going to have to find the rules and the balances in your own world to create the believability. But a lot of the believability doesn't even have to do with the world building. It has to do with the plot, the characters. Does the motivation actually make sense? Are they making decisions and goals that would actually make sense with a real human being? And then number 4, that is super important, is a twist. What gets your reader excited? What makes them jump out of their seat and make them want to read this book? What makes them start turning pages? What is the unusual element to subvert a reader's expectation? You have to have something there that just is a bang that makes them have to pick up this book. And sometimes those are easy to come up with. Sometimes that's what I start with. That's what comes into my head first. And sometimes that is the hardest part. So making sure to find a really reliable twist is way super important. And then the last one is comp titles. So through comp titles, you'll find your core audience. So comp titles are basically like, my story is blank book meets blank book. Usually you want to pick books that actually sell well, because that's what agents and editors are going to be looking at, because they want to make sure that when you pitch your book, that the books that you use actually sold well, so that you have a market for your book. The basis of comp titles and finding your core audience is seeing if your book would sell. In a very matter-of-fact way, that is what agents and editors are looking for. It's all about getting the next book that's actually going to sell. But it is also super important as an author to come up with the comp titles and figure them out early on, so you know that there's different elements in different stories that are similar to yours. Obviously, you do not want to be copying them. That's not okay. But you want to find different pieces in different books that are similar or that relate to your books, and then use those as comp titles and show that yes, there is an audience that likes this type of book. So usually when I write out my concepts, I just put the comp titles at the top, like story A meets story B, and then that is right there so everyone can look at it and see what I'm thinking with that. I am horrible at comp titles, just to say. I am not good at that. That just takes a lot of brainstorming and help from friends who actually read more. I read a lot in my genre. I just have a really hard time finding relatable comp titles. So, what is our structure for our actual concept? I know I said it was 200 to 350 words, and it's supposed to be small, and it has all of those 5 things in it. So what actually is included in our concept? So the fundamentals of it is the sympathetic character must reach the goal, which is the believability, because if not, they will lose something vital, which is the high stakes. But what they don't know is twist. So that is the fundamentals of creating a really high stakes, awesome concept. I use these at the beginning of crafting a novel to pitch my books to the instructors at the Author Conservatory and see if they're actually worth writing. And then I also use different formats of them in things like one sheets. Those are super helpful to create one sheets based off your blurb, because one sheets basically cover the same thing. You need that good, strong blurb. So creating a blurb with this is super helpful because it covers all your bases, and you know that what you need to include is actually in there, and it's not just a random tangent that goes down a bunny trail. I also use extended versions of these in things like one-page synopsises, and it's just super helpful to have these shortened blurbs under your belt so that when you actually need something, you've got it. So that's all for today. Make sure to follow along for more writing tips. And if you have anything else to add or you have any questions, make sure to drop a comment and I will respond to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.